Hello, everybody. Alex Aronson here with Court Accountability Action here on the Legal AF Network. We are thrilled to be joined today by a distinguished and renowned historian at Princeton University, Professor Sean Wilentz. He's a historian of U.S. Political and social history. He's the professor, the George Henry Davis 1886 Professor of American History at Princeton University, and has written just a host of really incredibly influential and important works, The Rise of American Democracy, Jefferson to Lincoln, among others. And Professor Wilentz, you're joining us today because you and a cohort of other incredibly impressive history professors and historians have just published a powerful letter to denounce the possibility of another Trump presidency and to endorse Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris. I wanted to just have you on here to tell us about this letter, tell us about the other historians on it. I thought it might be helpful just to read some excerpts from it because it's so powerful, and I think I love the idea also just getting historians for Harris together, because I think it's so easy for us to, in this modern media age, just get sucked into sort of the day-to-day news cycles that we're all, just consumed by. But the perspective you bring from your deep expertise of American history, your study of these other critical inflection points, you mentioned the election of 1860 here. I think just brings such important perspective to the moment we're living in that we lose when we're kind of in those weeds. So I'll just read a quick excerpt from this letter and then ask you to sort of tell us about it. But you write that today Donald Trump, openly hostile to democracy and to American constitutional customs, seeks to return to office as president. He has flagrantly defied the rule of law. He has repeatedly sought to thwart the result of the free and fair election of 2020. His performance has persuaded many of those who worked most closely with him that he is an authoritarian, now a convicted felon. He has stated his intention to use his power to intimidate, prosecute, and imprison his political critics and opponents, whom he designates as, quote, the enemy within. Given the free hand that he would enjoy today by the Supreme Court's presidential immunity decision, we take his threats with utmost seriousness as a clear and present danger to American democracy. Really powerful language. The rest of the letter is just superb. Also, note also the invocation of the presidential immunity decision. Would love to get into that too. So,
Well, Alex, it's great to be here. Of all places, it's wonderful to be here. So you want to talk about the letter? I mean, the letter was written by historians with an historical perspective, as you said. It actually begins with an invocation of the 1860 election as an example of an example not unlike what we're facing now. But let me back up for a sec. As you said, historians have a particular perspective on current events. We tend not to want to get too involved in politics like this because we disagree about just about everything. But on this, we are united, and this includes people from across the political spectrum. There are some 500 odd historians who have signed on. I mean, to get, as I say, 500 historians who agree about anything, but certainly on politics. But also, we don't write in support of a particular candidate very, very often. This is a different kind of situation. This is a much graver situation. This is a situation that actually involves the Constitution, that actually involves real breaks with the past and with really with the Constitution itself. So, we believe that historians do have a civic function, or can have a civic function, in informing the voters, the citizenry, what we think, what our history tells us, what our long study of American history tells us. And what it tells us is that we're in a very, very grave situation right now, and hence the letter. A bunch of us, what happened was just a bunch of us have been talking about this, what we might be able to do as historians. And, some of the names, Ron Chernow and Ken Burns and Sid Blumenthal and a bunch of us just composed the thing. I actually drafted it, and then they made it much better. And then we sent it out. We sent it out to far and wide, and some 500 historians have signed on. So that's the sort of background to what happened. It was all done very, very quickly, but thanks to the internet and so forth, we can get these things done quickly. I remember doing something that's in the last another constitutional crisis during the Clinton impeachment, 25 years ago, and it was the first time I had my brush with the internet. Anyway, this is in fact a much graver situation, although there's a connection between what happened then and what happened now. And we wanted to make very, very clear what the constitutional and historical stakes are. You know, Part of the problem with living in the here and now all of the time is that I think the media is actually in part to blame for this, is that we have a feeling that this is a normal election. It may be a stressful election, it may be a weird election, it may be, but it's a normal election with two political parties, with their candidates, with different views of how America ought to be run, each trying to get 270 electoral votes. That's not what we're facing right now. We're facing an abnormal situation. I mean, and I on my own writing have called it a rolling coup d'état that really began in earnest. It began a long time ago, but it began in earnest in 2016, and then really picked up speed in 2020. We have a candidate here who does not respect American democracy, does not respect the Constitution, has said as much that he would abridge the Constitution if he saw fit, who is seeking with his fellows, with his comrades, to basically take over the American government. And not only to lead it in an extreme direction, the policies almost don't matter. The very idea that anyone would want to take over the American government, to break with the Constitution, is extremely alarming. And we're not making this up. He's saying all of this. I mean, it's not as if so. So the idea that we're in normal times, this is an election like any other, is something that we wanted to say no. That's not the case. That this is much more like the situation we had in 1860. It has much more in common with that, which was a national crisis, which of course ended up plunging us into a civil war. We're not saying a civil war is going to happen. What we're saying is that the constitutional stakes are just as grave.
Yeah. It's I'm so glad that you mentioned, the folks that are supporting him, right? Because, we had this moment after that
Hmm.
horrible day, January 6th. I was working in the Senate that day, and, it was, visceral, and we saw
Hmm.
the immediately in the aftermath of that insurrection, a real denunciation of Trump's behavior, a rejection of Trump, including by Republicans, right? Lindsey Graham speaking out against him, McConnell speaking out against him. But over the subsequent days, and as the impeachment proceeded, and as the trial came to the Senate, where I worked on that impeachment trial, also the something switched. Right, there was a calculation by these politicians that they had to stick with him for whatever reason. And I think
Yeah.
as we look at this election, you also mentioned these other people that had worked for him and are now calling him authoritarians, who sort of, to the extent there were
Hmm.
checks on him during the first Trump administration, hopefully the only Trump administration, they were the ones providing it. Now we've got this huge sort of
Hmm.
cohort of interests and or operatives and the groups behind Project 2025 that are very clearly sort of standing at the ready to
Right.
use him, but also enable him in pursuing
Hmm.
this. And the court's a
Hmm.
big part of that. So I was hoping
Yeah.
you could dig into a
Yeah.
little bit more about the immunity case and the courts in general, sort
Hmm.
of like what the roles the courts and these justices
Yeah.
may play. Particularly after the immunity decision, what that means. But in the post-election period, or certainly in a sort of, if we're in the terrible scenario of Trump regaining the White House, how that all could kind of interplay.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Both in terms of getting there and what would happen afterwards. You raised a lot of very important points, Alex, just now about people bending themselves into pretzels in order to support Trump. Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz being two big examples. It's not unlike what I wrote just sort of piece about Philip Roth, and it's a bit like the Plot Against America, in that you find in that book. What's interesting about that book is not the true believers who believe in Charles Lindbergh, but it's the people who twist and turn and come up with some reasons to support him, even though they might denounce him. In fact, and then they twist and turn. The court is crucial to all of this. I mean, in 2020, the fact was that they came up with 60 odd lawsuits to try and get their point across to overthrow the election. And in all but one case, I think they were basically turned aside. I'm not as confident today that would occur, given the way the courts have moved. I'm certainly not confident at all after the immunity decision that the Supreme Court, should it come to the Supreme Court, that we wouldn't end up with a decision even worse than Bush v. Gore. That is to say, a decision that would hand the presidency to Trump on the most specious grounds. The immunity decision was a break in constitutional history, as far as I'm concerned. It was the most sweeping change at the judicial level of the presidency in American history. The idea that the president is immune from criminal prosecution for all official acts, whatever he deems to be official acts, is crazy. It's insane. It is nothing what the framers had in mind. I can cite chapter and verse out of the Federalist Papers to show that. It doesn't matter. But we would not have had U.S. v. Nixon, for example, the case against Richard Nixon in 1974, which basically led to his resignation. That wouldn't have happened under this doctrine. This is a doctrine that is so extreme. And then coupled with the fact that the court did its best to protect Trump from prosecution during the year anyway, by delay. I mean, it's an old tactic that I have no confidence whatsoever that this is not simply a conservative majority on the Supreme Court, but a MAGA conservative majority on the Supreme Court. And so I'm very, very concerned. Now, I'm not as down as all that. I have confidence that we'll have enough voters out there. The voters, in effect, will decide this election, not the court. But it's tight enough for me to be very, very concerned. But that decision, the Trump v. Few cases come before the Supreme Court are more accurately named than Trump versus the United States. That is a very apt title. Unfortunately, Trump won and the United States lost in that decision.
Right, right, right. Professor, you wrote an extraordinary article soon after that immunity decision came out. It was in the New York Review of Books. It was about the immunity decision. It was titled "The Dred Scott of Our Time," and that's a striking way to describe it. Can you break down a little bit more the parallels to Dred Scott? Why you invoked that, and tell our listeners about Dred Scott. I think most folks are familiar, but I think that'd be helpful context too.
Yeah. Dred Scott was a case involving, an enslaved man named Dred Scott and his wife Harriet, and they were suing for their freedom. And basically, the court decided that they could not stand; they had no standing. But they went beyond that. Chief Justice Roger Brooke Taney went beyond that to declare not only that blacks have no citizenship, never have had citizenship in the United States, but that everything that was the platform of the Republican Party at that point was unconstitutional, which is to say that Congress had no power over slavery in the territories. It was giving a maximalist pro-slavery view to the Constitution. They've been trying to do this for a long, long time, but the Taney Court put its stamp on all of that, which basically meant that Abraham Lincoln and his party were unconstitutional. Now, Lincoln stood up to all of that, but what they were trying to do really in that decision is to make it impossible for the Republicans for any action against slavery to be taken politically to occur. They were trying to make the way clear for the slave power to really control the American government. Full stop. There would be no contestation over all of those things. Only the slave power could rule because that's what they said the Constitution held. Now, I liken that to the Trump v. U.S. decision because they've basically done the same thing in the sense that they've cleared the way for MAGA rule. They've cleared the way now for a president with bad idea, bad intentions, shall we say, to rule as a virtual dictator. I mean, they've basically undone the idea that there's any constraints on presidential behavior whatsoever, up to and including, killing his political opponents if he can claim that it's an official act, committing a coup d'état if he conceives, So the similarity is there. They're both trying to prepare the way for an order that was not there, for a regime that was not there. One being a regime of the slave power, the second being the regime of mob.
Oh, man. It's true. And something you said there about sort of Lincoln standing up against that, right? And it's almost like it's a political will that we have not seen manifested, right? Because this is as extreme and dangerous as this immunity cases, and as sort of sui generis as I think we can fairly describe it. These justices have been advancing structural attack on American democracy, an ideological policy-driven attack on American democracy for a long time that is weakening our ability to sort of see the will of democracy and the people's vote reflected in our laws and society. And our political actors have not been able to manifest that same will or political strength. And I wonder because and I agree with you. I think the people will rise up and defeat this fascist threat next week. But we'll still be left with this court and the supreme power that it is wielding. And I think that will be the work, right? We talk a lot about what we can do as citizens, as people, as activists to create the change we want to see in the world. They are going to remain an impediment, and this is the worldview that they are espousing. I wonder if you have any historical perspective or other thoughts on how this could go if say Harris takes the presidency. We have maybe a Democrats in the House of Representatives, how it could go to constrain a court that seems not to care at all about principle or law.
Yeah. They don't care at all because they think they have supreme power, which they don't under the
Right.
Constitution. The fact is that the Constitution is not simply decided by what the Supreme Court says. That's a doctrine that's kind of in people's minds that they have the final say. But as Abraham Lincoln said himself, he said, look, Dred Scott applies to Dred Scott and his wife. It doesn't apply to anything else. It is not settled law. Now, this court has thought nothing about unsettling settled law, as in the Dobbs decision, but nevertheless, they are not the only ones who get to say what the Constitution says. Congress has a great deal to say about what the Constitution says. And as Lincoln said, look, we can appoint a new Supreme Court if we're in power long enough. They're not going to last forever. That's number one. But number two, we can pass laws. Congress passed a law basically undoing the Dred Scott decision in 1862 while Tony was still on the court. There was nothing the court could do about that. So it's not as if they have supreme power. They act as if they do. They rely on the fact that people think that they do. It's going to be up to us, in fact, and Alex, you'll have a great deal to do with all of this to persuade people, to show people that, in fact, it's not the case. That the court is not does not dictate what the Constitution says. It can interpret the Constitution, but it is not the final word. That's what we have to, I think, should things go our way, as I hope they will, but they're still around, we're going to have to find some way to make that clear. And that is a huge political fight in front of us, no matter what happens on Tuesday.
Yeah, but it's a good one, and one worth getting our hands dirty to pursue, because I think that's the fight ahead of us. Really grateful for your time, for your leadership in organizing all these incredible scholars, for the clarion language that you put down on paper to put out into the world, to plant this marker in this critical moment of our country's history. Professor Wilentz, thank you so much.
Well,
Everybody,
thank you,
don't
Alex. Thank you,
forget.
Alex. I don't interrupt. Thank you, Alex, for all you're doing as well. I mean, we're an alliance. We're all in this together, and I'm just so happy you're by our side.
Really appreciate it, Professor. Everybody, don't forget to like and subscribe to Legal AF for more amazing content and conversation like this. Professor Wilentz would love to have you back as things proceed into the uncertain and hopeful future. Really grateful for you. Thanks.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.